Series called The Parables of Jesus, and we are going to spend the next 2 months talking about parables that Jesus told. A parable is a simple story that has a much bigger meaning. Like any good teacher, Jesus wanted to make sure that who he was talking to understood what he was talking about. So sometimes he would use these simple stories to get his point across, to get the actual lesson across, right? And the parable that we're talking about today is called The Parable of the Sower. And when I'm reading this parable, you're going to think it sounds like the story of a farmer, but it's about so much more than that. And Jesus uses this parable to show us how important it is to let the Bible transform our lives. And this parable can be found in Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 20. Another time, Jesus began teaching by the lake. A great crowd gathered around him, so he got into a boat and went out on the lake. All the people stayed on the shore close to the water. Jesus used many stories to teach them. He said, "Listen, a farmer went out to plant his seeds. While the farmer was planting, some seed fell by the road. The birds came and ate all that seed. Some seed fell on rocky ground where there wasn't much dirt. That seed grew very fast there because the ground was not deep. But when the sun rose, the plants withered. The plants died because they did not have deep roots. Some other seed fell among thorny weeds. The weeds grew and choked the good plants, so those plants did not make grain. Some other seed fell on good ground. In the good ground, the seed began to grow. It grew and made a crop of grain. Some plants made 30 times more grain, some 60 times more grain, and some 100 times more grain." Now I'm going to skip down to verse 14 where Jesus explains what the story is about. The farmer is like a person who plants God's teaching in people. Sometimes the teaching falls on the road. This is like some people. They hear the teaching of God, but Satan quickly comes and takes away the teaching that was planted in them. Others are like the seed planted on rocky ground. They hear the teaching and they quickly accept it with joy, but they don't allow the teaching to go deep into their lives. They keep it only a short time. When troubles come about in their life, they give up. Others are like the seed planted among the thorny weeds. They hear the teaching, but then other things come into their lives. Worries, the love of money, and wanting all kinds of other things. These things stop the teaching from growing, so that teaching does not produce fruit in their lives. Others are like the seed planted in the good ground. They hear the teaching and accept it. Then they grow and produce fruit, sometimes 30 times more, sometimes 60 times more, and sometimes 100 times more. So a lot of the people in the crowd that Jesus was talking to were farmers, and that is why Jesus used a farming story to teach them about the importance of God's word. So it's kind of like if baseball is your favorite sport and you were struggling with understanding something at school, maybe like a math problem. Well, if your teacher used baseball to teach you about math, you'd be much more likely to remember it and understand it, right? Because baseball is something that you do and something that you're interested in. And those are kind of the same ways that Jesus used to teach large crowds of people. He would teach them something really important, but he would put it in words that they understood. And a lot of these guys were farmers. So when he talks about planting seeds and growing crops, those are things that these people know and understand. And it was helpful for them to understand what Jesus was talking about and to remember it better, right? So we want to be like the seed that was planted in the good soil, right? We don't want to be like the seed scattered on the path and the birds ate it. When we hear God's word, we have to listen. We have to listen and pay attention because it's so important. We don't want to be the seed that falls among the rocks and the thorns. We don't want to get distracted and forget what we heard. When we're like that seed that's planted in the good soil, we can produce a huge crop too. And I'm not talking about crops like in the field. We're not talking about growing a garden. We're talking about growing in our faith. When we produce a huge crop as Christians, it looks like praying for our friends or helping those in need. It also looks like bringing our friends to church or telling someone about Jesus. And all of the parables that we're going to be learning about in this series are so awesome because they teach us some really important things, but Jesus tells it in a way that's really easy for us to understand and remember. And thank you guys for watching this video on the parable of the sower. We have lots of parables to talk about in the next 2 months. We're going to become experts on the parables of Jesus together. And so this week, let's try to be like that seed that was planted in the good soil. We want to produce a huge crop in our Christian lives, right? So this week you can find ways to help people. You can pray for your friends and family, or maybe even think of someone to invite to church next week. For everyone watching online, we all miss you so much. I can't wait until we're together again. Until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.